I think we should cover Biden's presser and the freak out over Biden, at least briefly.
Yeah.
Since it's all anyone can talk about here in the US. Biden gave his what Trump called his big boy press conference at the end of the NATO summit. I think it was the first time that Biden was alone before the press. It wasn't a joint press conference. And it wasn't completely controlled, although he called out the names of reporters. He had them handed to him, and he would sort of look down and say, so-and-so from Reuters, David Sanger, New York Times. And I don't think most people experience this press conference through the press conference, which is unfortunate because the reality was more complex than the coverage of it. Most people experienced it through Biden's various gaffes, which appeared in clips on social media. And, the cat is out of the bag. Biden is in cognitive decline. And the Democratic Party elite, which means almost the entire Western media or US media, is now determined to dislodge him as the winner of the Democratic primary that never happened, and to replace him with someone, probably Kamala Harris. If he's not replaced with Kamala Harris, it would be Gavin Newsom. And I don't know how that would happen. We can talk about that in a second, but I don't want to show any video of it. You have to really watch the press conference. I would advise watching from like 20 or 25 minutes on, when the questions about foreign policy start to come in, particularly Biden's exchange with David Sanger, who is obviously someone he talks to privately or has a relationship with. All the questions start out about Biden's dementia or cognitive decline and whether he can actually continue for another 2 or 3 more years, if not one more debate with Trump. But then they turn to foreign policy, and you can see Biden shifting. He started the presser by coughing nervously. He was stammering. He referred to Kamala Harris as Vice President Trump. He had to answer for earlier in the day referring to Zelensky as Putin, which in the eyes of imperialist liberals is probably the worst gaffe you can possibly make. And Zelensky's face was pretty priceless, his reaction. But when Biden's addressing foreign policy issues, he appeared in total command. He appeared old. He still would occasionally stumble, but he was in command of the facts. He was putting forward his vision, a very clear vision. He was putting forward accurate statistics on how much territory Russia had taken, for example, somewhat inaccurate statistics on Russians killed in action and casualties. He would make historical references based on his time in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that were fairly lucid. And it speaks to why Biden is refusing to leave office, because he believes that he is actually in command of foreign policy, and he is still in command of the facts, and he pays attention to some degree during briefings. And I think it's going to be much harder to dislodge him than people realize, because on this area, he's still kind of there, at least on a good day, maybe when he's on the good cognitive enhancement drugs. And if you actually consider what would have happened if Kamala Harris were subjected to a similar press conference where she's there alone in front of the international press at a momentous summit like that which NATO just hosted, she would have performed so much more horribly than Biden did. And this is the person that George Clooney, on behalf of the Hollywood donors and the Hollywood elite, this scheming, conniving little doofus who had just done a fundraiser for Biden, and much of the media, including Biden's former allies and everyone on CNN and increasing members in Congress, this is the person in Kamala Harris that they want to put forward. I think the Democrats could be setting themselves up for an even bigger disaster than Joe Biden, is what I'm saying. And they're not going to get Biden out after that press conference. So that was my take on the presser. Aaron, did you? I don't know if you watched it or not, or you wanted to offer your thoughts.
Well, you talking about Biden's enthusiasm and his level of presence when it comes to foreign policy. Yeah, as you said, it speaks to who he is. He's a hegemon. That's what animates him. That's what gets him riled up. There was one of these articles recently based on leaks from the inside. Now Biden's aides are talking about how he's been out of touch and he's not the same person. But they all say, and this was in one of these recent articles, that on foreign policy he's really, really engaged. On domestic policy, he sort of delegates things to his aides, but on foreign policy he is really engaged because, as you can see from when he speaks, what guides him is U.S. hegemony and his commitment to it, which is his whole career. That anecdote from 40 years ago when he told Menachem Begin that he should kill as many civilians in Lebanon as he wants to, and that we would do the same thing if we were in a similar situation from Canada. Biden said that's who he is. He's a hegemon. He's a warmonger. So it doesn't surprise me that is still what can get his synapses to work, to connect. And for the Democratic Party elite, especially the most committed hegemons, they're starting to backtrack now that they see him animated on that issue because they love they love his commitment to the proxy war in Ukraine, and also they love what he's doing in Gaza, facilitating mass murder on behalf of Israel. So here, for example, is Rachel Maddow, who said nothing about Gaza at all. And you can, as Layla Al-Arian pointed out, you can see why, because she thinks on all these issues he's fundamentally right.
Chris, and I won't go on at length. I will just say, though, you noted that there were some moments of, startlingly impressive command of the issues. This is just my opinion. He is not only strong on foreign policy, he is just fundamentally right on foreign policy in the way that he talks about it. And again, your mileage may vary. That is how I feel about the way he talks about our relationship with our allies and our relationship with NATO. You can hear his command of the issues, particularly in his asides, like mentioning as an offhand way that it was Turkey really that needed really to be talked into an expansion of NATO that included Finland and Sweden, talking about the numbers of Russian troop losses in Ukraine, talking about the fact that he turned.
Yeah, those numbers of Russian troop losses are fiction concocted by U.S. intelligence, but that's beside the point.
In his notes after he spoke privately with President Xi, alluding to the fact that Trump had all those weird meetings with the Russians and Putin in which he had no note taker present. I mean, it's even in the little asides where it just shows you he is a master of the foreign policy field and has been for decades in his career in the Senate, the vice president, and the presidency.
So someone who thinks that the president who's facilitating mass murder in Gaza is fundamentally right on foreign policy, like Maddow and many others of that ilk, I think we're going to see now them rallying behind him because they're going to remember, as you talked about, that if serving a hegemonic agenda, he's more capable than Kamala Harris is, who doesn't have the same command of these issues and the same commitment to hegemony that Biden does, and she's more goofy in executing it. So I think as a result, you might see even more of a fissure inside the Democratic Party, those who, can't ignore what they see in Biden, but also those who are fundamentally committed to his foreign policy and don't care that he's helping to slaughter tens of thousands of people in Gaza. I think you might see more reactions like that.
Well, I think Biden is actually, while he might have cooled off since his earlier days, he's coming out as, based on that presser especially, a more effective manager of these devastating conflicts. He talked explicitly when asked about the Gaza genocide. Of course, he wasn't asked in those terms, about how he is suspending or blocking 2,000-pound bomb shipments to Israel, but giving them 500-pound bombs. When he was asked about allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, he said, I don't think it's a good idea to allow them to strike in Moscow and to attack the Politburo or to attack Putin's home. That would be wrong. But of course, he's allowing them to strike inside Russia in Belgorod, for example, to attack inside Crimea on the beach in Sevastopol. So Biden's giving 500-pound bombs, but not 2,000-pound bombs. Strikes in Crimea, but not in Moscow. He's trying to manage these conflicts and manage the perception of escalation, that the U.S. isn't forcing everyone up the escalation ladder. I don't know if Kamala Harris would have been able to finessed those questions, she would have just issued bumper sticker slogans and talked about how Israel needs to be unburdened by what has been. With Biden, he actually referred to Israel's war in Gaza as folly that the U.S. experienced in Afghanistan, and declared in so many words that the U.S. should have never gone further than targeting bin Laden at Tora Bora and the al-Qaeda network, and that it was idiotic to actually mount a regime change war and an occupation of Afghanistan for over 20 years. That was, of course, something that Biden supported over and over until it was too late. But it was interesting to hear him say that. You're just not going to get that same kind of reflectiveness or feigning of reflectiveness from Kamala, and it's something that the Beltway press corps really eats up. The pundits like it. The donor class, maybe not. They're not that bright. And then Kamala, you know, they can start clamoring for Biden's ouster on the grounds that, you know, he always was just a racist who opposed busing, and Kamala, she was that girl who got bused to school, and Biden is preventing a younger black woman from becoming the first black female president because he's just a supremacist. They can actually activate that narrative. They haven't done it yet, but Kamala has a network, and there's, you know, that's baked into the cake in the Democratic Party. So the longer Biden stays in, I think there'll be a brief kind of interregnum with the Republican convention where the press will turn its guns on Trump, and then they'll return to Biden and versus Kamala. So it's just like a total meltdown. And on to your point, Aaron, I mean, Biden has launched a new ad portraying Trump as a Putin puppet, and it's you know, basically they want to run this campaign on foreign policy, which is an issue the American public doesn't care that much about usually. This is the new ad.
The campaign this morning is out with a new ad hitting Donald Trump on his actions and his comments surrounding Russian President Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine.
Our safety is built on agreements like NATO, which has protected us for 75 years. And our security is based on an understanding that we never give comfort to dictators. So why does Donald Trump keep siding with Putin? He said he'd walk away from NATO and gave Putin a green light to attack whoever he wants.
I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
He sold out Ukraine to empower Putin. He attacks American intelligence and law enforcement and sides with Putin instead, because this is who Donald Trump is. A lapdog for a dictator who blames America first. The United States must never be like Putin's Russia. We don't empower dictators. We don't undermine freedom.
My message to President Putin is simple. We will not walk away. We will not bow down. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
The Biden-Harris.
Kind of a disturbing ad. I mean, if that's the kind of campaign they want to run.
It's all they got. It's all they've got. This is what they've built their identity around for, you know, a long time, but especially since Russiagate blew open and everything else is crumbling around them. They're losing donors, so they can pivot to the one thing that they have at their core, which is just this Cold War chauvinism that will never go away. And they're hoping that will reach people. But again, as you said, most Americans don't care about this, despite, you know, years of Russiagate propaganda. You never saw major, huge rallies for like the Mueller investigation. Like, remember when there are all these efforts to like have rallies for Mueller, like when Rod Rosenstein got fired or whatever, and a couple of dozen people would show up. I mean, it just doesn't move people because most people don't benefit from the hegemonic agenda that ad is pushing. In fact, they suffer from it. So, but it's all they got left.
I covered the largest rally for Mueller and the Mueller investigation. It had a few hundred people. It was completely bonkers. It was like a John Birch Society McCarthyite rally from the early 60s or late 50s, but it was all liberal wine moms and wine aunts.
And Jamie Raskin, who you interviewed.
Jamie Raskin was speaking there. He'd just been handed a script and he didn't even know what he was reading, calling for like regime change in Putin's axis of authoritarianism around the world, including in the Philippines, was just bonkers. But they're not going to be able to bring that back. There just isn't a drumbeat for a new Russiagate investigation. But that's Biden's ad on freedom and democracy. He channeled it in his press conference and said the press didn't understand why I did a speech about democracy, referring to his Dark Brandon speech in front of a White House colored red, which is just bizarre. It's very abstract for the American public, as is Ukraine. Even Democrats have soured on Project Ukraine. It's just costing too much. What they care about is inflation being controlled and cooling off so that interest rates can come down. And inflation is cooling. There are some okay numbers for Biden. The Fed isn't going to be able to bring down interest rates till at least September, and that's going to be too late. So, you see New York Times articles like, how can Biden get the public to understand this is a Goldilocks economy? And he talks about all the job numbers, and he personally created all these new jobs by pushing buttons in the White House. It's just not working. So, the money's on disaster for the Democrats. And then a freak out across the entire transatlantic axis.